Today, as I speak, we are in the midst of the 2020 coronavirus pandemic that started in China and has spread widely, creating a worldwide crisis that threatens the health of all 7 billion of us. People often ask, why does God allow terrible calamities like this to afflict us? In response to such questions, leaders of various religious traditions offer differing explanations. Some say God is punishing us for being sinful. Others say God is using this crisis to test our faith and strengthen our devotion. Others, from Eastern traditions, say God is using this virus to bring the lives of thousands of people to an end because all their karmas have been exhausted. For many of us, none of these explanations sound very comforting, nor are they particularly helpful in coping with this dreadful situation. Similar explanations were offered in 2001 when a band of terrorists hijacked 4 airliners filled with innocent people and crashed them into the World Trade Center, the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., and into a field in rural Pennsylvania. 3,000 people perished, many more were injured, and countless others were traumatized or bereaved. On that fateful day, was God punishing us or testing us somehow? Were those 3,000 people destined to die because of their karmas? Or were their lives snuffed out by a malevolent force of evil? And if so, why does God allow such evil to exist? Catastrophes like the ongoing pandemic and the 9/11 attacks raise lots of difficult questions about God, about God's will, about good and evil, and about the doctrine of karma. Before considering these questions, it's important to distinguish 2 different kinds of evil: natural evil and moral evil. Natural evil, as its name implies, is born of nature. Earthquakes, tsunamis, and hurricanes are natural evils. The coronavirus, too, is a natural evil. Moral evil, on the other hand, is the result of using free will to deliberately commit deeds that harm others. Murder, genocide, and the terror attacks of 9/11 are examples of moral evil. These 2 kinds of evil must not be confused. For instance, global warming cannot be considered a natural evil because it's a result of our own willful but short-sighted behavior. On the other hand, if a snake bites you, it's a natural evil because snakes have no free will with which they can intentionally bite you. Now, many people wonder, if God is all-knowing, all-powerful, and perfectly good, then why does he allow evil and suffering to exist? Western philosophers and theologians have struggled with this problem for centuries. Not surprisingly, they call it the problem of evil. One of its earliest expressions was formulated by an ancient Greek philosopher named Epicurus, who said, "Is God willing to prevent evil, but not able? Then he is not all-powerful. Is he able, but not willing? Then he is not perfectly good. Is he both able and willing? Then how can evil exist? Is he neither able nor willing? Then why call him God?" For followers of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, The source or embodiment of evil is sometimes said to be the devil, Satan, who is believed to be a fallen angel or demonic being. Regardless of whether or not Satan actually exists, the existence of moral and natural evil is accepted by all Western theologians. They've tried very hard to justify or reconcile the existence of evil with a God who is all-knowing, all-powerful, and perfectly good. In the East, this problem has been approached quite differently by Hindus, Buddhists, Jains, and Sikhs. Let's examine both Eastern and Western approaches to the problem of evil, starting with the Western traditions. Saint Augustine is a highly esteemed Roman Catholic theologian from the 5th century. He believed that a perfect God created a perfect world with perfect human beings. And in a perfect world, there can be no such thing as evil. According to Augustine, evil doesn't truly exist. Evil is simply the absence of goodness, like silence is the absence of sound, or cold is the absence of heat. Because human beings are perfect, they're endowed with free will. They're free to choose and perform good deeds and other deeds completely lacking in goodness. The famous biblical story about the first humans, Adam and Eve, portrays them as living in Eden, an ethereal realm completely free from evil and suffering. There, Satan, in the form of a snake, enticed them to eat the fruit of a particular tree that God had commanded them not to eat. In this way, Adam and Eve used their free will to violate God's command. As a result, they were punished by being expelled from Eden to live in the world and suffer its many evils, as did all their descendants. Augustine used this story to explain that natural evils, like earthquakes, hurricanes, and the coronavirus, are the result of Adam and Eve's expulsion from Eden. We, as their descendants, are condemned to live in a world of suffering. In addition to this, Augustine explained moral evil as a result of using one's free will to commit deeds that violate God's commandments. Augustine reasoned that if God prevented us from committing evil deeds, then our free will would not be perfectly free. So, according to Augustine, both natural and moral evils are our fault, not God's fault. But over the centuries, his conclusions have been widely criticized by other theologians and philosophers. For example, if Almighty God could create an Eden that's completely free from suffering, then he could certainly create a world that's completely free from suffering, a world of perfect goodness without evils of any kind. Also, if evil is merely the absence of goodness, is it reasonable to say that Hitler's murder of 6 million Jews during World War II was merely due to the absence of goodness? Another Christian theologian who tried to justify the existence of evil was Saint Irenaeus. Unlike Augustine, Irenaeus did not think that God created a perfect world with perfect people, but rather God created a world full of evil and suffering. Why? Because a world full of evil and suffering is the best possible world for imperfect people to develop their qualities and improve their natures. The world is like a school for educating the soul, with God himself as the teacher. So, for Irenaeus, God allows natural and moral evils to exist because they help us grow to become more perfect. His attempt to justify the existence of evil has many shortcomings. For example, why didn't God simply make us perfect in the first place, instead of creating imperfect beings and then needing to improve them? Also, suffering doesn't always lead to growth, as Irenaeus thought. What growth is gained by the suffering of infants born with terminal birth defects? And if God deliberately makes us suffer to help us grow, does the end truly justify the means? These questions require much more inquiry than we can do here. But the point of all this discussion is to show how difficult it is to reconcile the existence of evil with a God who is all-knowing, all-powerful, and perfectly good. There seems to be no ultimate solution to the problem of evil that's accepted by all Western theologians and philosophers. Now, let's see how the problem of evil is approached in the East. The following ideas are based on the Hindu Vedantic tradition in which I've been trained, but much of it applies to the Buddhist, Jain, and Sikh traditions as well. We can begin with a quote from an important Vedic scripture, the Chandogya Upanishad, that boldly proclaims Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma. All this, the entire world, is a form or manifestation of Brahman, the supreme reality, the limitless conscious fabric of existence. In English, the word that comes closest to Brahman is God. So, according to this passage, Brahman, or God, is the divinity that abides in every atom, in every rock and tree, in every animal and person. Simply put, all that exists is divine. And if everything is divine, then nothing is evil. But then, how can we explain natural evils like the coronavirus and moral evils like the 9/11 attacks? Let's start with natural evil. Everything in nature is a divine manifestation of Brahman, or God. The coronavirus is as natural as trees and grass and everything else. So it, too, is a divine manifestation. Then, why do people say the virus is a natural evil? Why is it called bad? Well, consider these two trees. Would you say one tree is good and the other is bad? Words like good and bad can describe someone's behavior, but these words really aren't appropriate for describing trees. These trees are neither good nor bad. They're just natural. The problem is we commonly use the words good and bad to describe nature. We say, sunny weather is good, but rainy weather is bad. Lush forests are good, but dry, barren deserts are bad. Juicy peaches are good, but bitter gourd is bad. In each of these examples, good actually means what you like, and bad means what you don't like. Yet, what's good and bad for you will be totally different for someone else. The rainy weather you call bad is quite good for farmers. So, good and bad are not fixed realities. Their meanings depend on our individual likes and dislikes. The relative nature of good and bad is cleverly shown in this traditional story. A prince who was widely renowned for his great wisdom once received a mighty horse as a gift. His attendant looked at the handsome beast and said, "Oh, what a wonderful horse." The wise prince said, "Wait and see." One day, when the prince was riding the horse, it bucked wildly and threw him to the ground, breaking his arm. His attendant rushed to his side and said, "Oh, what a terrible horse." The wise prince said, "Wait and see." Several days later, their kingdom was attacked by a huge army from a neighboring kingdom. There was no hope of defeating the vastly superior enemy forces. Yet all the young men of the kingdom were sent to the battlefield as a matter of duty, certain to lose their lives. When the prince's attendant saw his master's arm in a sling, preventing the prince from going to war, he exclaimed, "Oh, what a wonderful horse!" Wonderful and terrible, like good and bad, are not fixed realities. And bucking uncontrollable horses, like everything else in nature, are neither good nor bad. They're natural. Good is a label we arbitrarily apply to aspects of nature we like, and bad is a label we arbitrarily apply to aspects of nature that we don't like. We dislike so-called natural evils like earthquakes and the coronavirus, but natural evils are natural. The coronavirus is part of nature, and nature is divine. So, can we legitimately call it evil? It's bad, no doubt, really bad, but it's not evil. Consider earthquakes, like the one in Haiti a decade ago that killed 200,000 people, or the 2004 Indian Ocean earthquake that produced a giant tsunami, drowning 250,000 people. We call earthquakes natural disasters because they're natural. Earthquakes happen because the Earth's solid crust is broken up into sections called plates that crash into each other as they float on the Earth's massive core of molten iron. Suppose you ask, why didn't God give us a solid planet to live on so we wouldn't be killed by earthquakes? Well, our planet's core of molten iron produces a magnetic field that surrounds the Earth and protects us from deadly cosmic radiation. A solid Earth would be free from earthquakes, but no one could live on it because of the intense radiation. The truth is, nature is neither good nor bad. Nature isn't a benevolent source of endless pleasure, comfort, and nurturing. Nor is nature a malevolent source of suffering, illness, and death. Nature is just natural, and all that's natural is divine. So we can't truly say that anything in nature is evil. When people die due to the coronavirus, earthquakes, hurricanes, or other natural disasters, their deaths bring tremendous sadness and grief into our lives. But death, as we all know, is a natural part of the creation in which we live. The coronavirus, earthquakes, hurricanes, and so on are not natural evils. They're integral parts of this divine creation. But that fact doesn't give us license to ignore the consequences of such catastrophes. We all bear the responsibility to do everything possible to reduce the suffering of others. We can all reach out to others to lend them a hand. Now that we've discussed natural evil, let's examine the nature of moral evil. Imagine a terrorist in the Middle East who straps a bomb onto his body, walks into a crowded marketplace, and detonates it, killing himself along with several innocent shoppers. Why would he commit such a horrific deed, in spite of the fact that his own Islamic faith considers suicide to be sinful? Such terrorists are said to have been radicalized. That means they've been completely indoctrinated, sometimes from childhood onwards, into the radical ideology of violent jihad. They firmly believe that it's their religious duty to fight the enemies of Islam, even by sacrificing their own lives. This notion comes not from the Holy Quran, but from certain religious teachers who stridently preach this vicious ideology. Those preachers feel strongly that Islamic religion and culture are currently under attack by Western powers. Neither the suicide bomber nor the preacher who indoctrinated him would regard their actions as being morally evil. On the contrary, they'd consider themselves pious, courageous defenders of their faith. Unfortunately, such people fail to properly understand the fundamental tenets of Islam, as taught in the Quran. So, their reprehensible deeds are driven not by religious principles, nor by some kind of evil power, but by ignorance, by their false impressions and misconceived notions about what it means to be a pious Muslim. In spite of the fact that a suicide bomber is a divine being, just like anyone else, divine beings can commit horrific acts of violence under the influence of ignorance. The power of ignorance is astonishing. It veils or obscures the divinity present in every person and leads to desire, anger, fear, hurt, and depression. Vedantic texts often describe how ignorance can make a harmless coil of rope lying in a dark alley appear as a dangerous, venomous snake. If ignorance can transform an ordinary rope into a venomous snake, then it can certainly transform a devout Muslim into a fanatical terrorist. Swami Vivekananda, the famous Hindu teacher who popularized Vedanta in America, said, "Ignorance is the mother of all the evil and misery we see. Let men be pure and spiritually strong and educated. Then alone will misery cease in the world." The 3,000 people who lost their lives on 9/11 didn't die because of their karma. They died because the minds of 19 hijackers had been completely corrupted by fundamentalist preachers of violent jihad. All this is due to the power of ignorance. Yet, ignorance can never be an excuse for violent or harmful deeds. The actions of the hijackers cannot be pardoned or justified in any way by claiming that the hijackers were helplessly compelled by thorough indoctrination or psychological programming. We all have free will, and therefore we can always choose our actions. Our will is so free that we can choose to act contrary to any indoctrination received. We can always choose to follow Dharma, the path of righteousness, by refusing to engage in harmful actions of any kind. Based on our discussion, there is no evil power, no devil or satanic being that impels people to harm others. Instead, the root cause of harmful behavior is ignorance. And this is really good news because ignorance can be addressed by proper education and by good leadership. That's why it's crucial for today's religious and political leaders to stop spreading slanted narratives and disinformation that supports their personal agendas. Instead, they should speak uncorrupted truths, truths that dispel ignorance and make us better people. And we, as individuals, can strive to be more wise, more understanding of others and the natural world in which we live. This particular message is beautifully expressed in a prayer from the Vedas, which concludes this presentation. Asato ma sadgamaya, lead me from ignorance to truth. Tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, lead me from darkness to light. Mrityor ma amritam gamaya, lead me from suffering and death to liberation and immortality. Asato ma sadgamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityor ma amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.